Dr. Samantha Sam Williams stood in the marble-floored concourse of Dallas International Airport at 6:47 a.m., her manicured fingers trembling slightly as she gripped her boarding pass. The crisp white paper bore the magical words that had taken her 15 years to earn. First class, seat 2A. This wasn't just a ticket. It was validation, vindication, and victory, all folded into one rectangular piece of hope. The early morning sun streamed through the towering glass windows, casting golden rays across her perfectly tailored navy blazer, the same one she'd bought 3 years ago for her first major presentation, when she was still fighting for scraps at the conference room table. Now, at 32, that blazer had become her armor, worn to every crucial meeting, every make-or-break moment that had led her to this day. Sam's reflection in the polished terminal floor showed a woman who had clawed her way from a cramped studio apartment in Oakland to the executive floors of Silicon Valley. Her natural hair was styled in an elegant updo that had taken her an hour to perfect this morning. Every detail mattered today. Her presentation folder, clutched in her left hand, contained the proposal that would either make her the youngest vice president in Techno-Global Industries, 40-year history, or end her career in spectacular failure. The $50 million contract with Morrison Defense Systems wasn't just business, it was personal. For months, her male colleagues had whispered that she'd only gotten this opportunity because the company needed to diversify their image. They called it the diversity hire deal behind her back, assuming she'd fail and prove their point. What they didn't know was that Sam had been secretly working on this proposal for 2 years, using her own vacation time to research Morrison's needs, studying their competitors, and crafting a solution so innovative that it would revolutionize military communications technology. Her phone buzzed with encouraging texts from her support network. Her MIT roommate Sarah had sent a photo of her lucky penny. Her mentor, Dr. Patricia Williams, no relation, despite sharing a last name, had forwarded an article about breakthrough technologies in defense contracting. But the most meaningful message came from her younger brother Marcus, back in Oakland. Knock him dead, sis. Mom would be so proud. Their mother, Rosa Williams, had died when Sam was 19, her body worn out from working 3 jobs to put her brilliant daughter through MIT. Rosa had cleaned office buildings at night, served lunch at a community center during the day, and spent her evenings taking online courses to better understand Sam's engineering homework. Every success since then had been dedicated to her memory, every achievement a promise kept to a woman who never lived to see her daughter's dreams come true. Sam paused at the massive departure board, watching her flight information flicker. In bright yellow letters, on time. Flight 447 to New York LaGuardia, departing at 7:15 a.m. She'd specifically chosen the earliest flight to give herself maximum preparation time before her 2 p.m. presentation. Morrison's board was notorious for their punctuality and their ruthless efficiency in cutting short presentations that didn't immediately capture their attention. Flight 447 to New York LaGuardia. First-class passengers may now board. The gate. Agent announced through the speaker system, her voice echoing across the busy terminal. Sam's heart hammered against her ribs as she approached Gate 12. She'd flown coach her entire life, cramped middle seats, fighting for armrest space, eating stale pretzels, while dreaming of the first-class cabin behind that mysterious curtain. The few times she'd walked past first class during boarding, she'd caught glimpses of spacious leather seats, real glassware, and flight attendants who actually smiled. Today, she'd finally made it to the other side. The gate area buzzed with typical early morning airport energy. Business travelers tapped furiously on laptops. Families corralled sleepy children, and coffee shop workers called out order numbers in sing-song voices. But as Sam approached the boarding line, she noticed something that made her stomach clench. With familiar dread, the Skyline Airlines crew members huddled near the gate desk were stealing glances in her direction, their hushed conversation stopping abruptly when they saw her approaching. It was a scene she'd witnessed countless times. In corporate boardrooms, the moment when a room full of people suddenly realized they were about to be joined by someone they hadn't expected to see. Jessica Monroe, the blonde flight attendant with ice blue eyes and a smile that never reached them, looked Sam up and down with the same expression a security guard might give a suspected shoplifter. Her gaze lingered on Sam's designer handbag. Splurge purchase Sam had made after her last promotion, as if calculating whether it was authentic. Jessica's perfectly applied makeup and pristine uniform suggested someone who took great pride in maintaining appearances and order, the kind of person who might view Sam's presence as a disruption to both. Captain Robert Hayes stood beside Jessica, his silver hair perfectly groomed and his military straight posture screaming authority. At 58, he'd been flying for Skyline for nearly 3 decades, and his weathered face bore the expression of a man who'd grown comfortable with his assumptions about the world and his place in it. His arms were crossed as he surveyed Sam, his jaw set in the same disapproval she'd seen from countless executives who questioned her qualifications before she'd even opened her mouth. The third crew member, head flight attendant Marcus Thompson, was a tall black man in his 40s whose eyes briefly met Sam's before he looked away uncomfortably. For a split second, Sam felt a flash of recognition, the look of someone caught between solidarity and self-preservation. She'd seen that same expression in corporate boardrooms when other people of color chose silence over support, weighing the cost of speaking up against the risk of being labeled a troublemaker. As passengers began filing onto the jet bridge, Sam took a deep breath and approached the gate agent. The young woman, barely out of college, scanned Sam's boarding pass with practiced efficiency. "First class today, Dr. Williams," she said with genuine enthusiasm. "Enjoy your flight." But as Sam walked toward the aircraft door, she could feel the crew's suspicious stares burning into her back. Something was wrong. The air crackled with the same hostile energy she'd learned to navigate in hostile boardrooms and unwelcoming conference rooms. "Don't borrow trouble," she whispered to herself, echoing her mother's favorite piece of advice. "You've got enough real challenges ahead." But deep in her gut, Sam knew that her biggest battle wouldn't be in the boardroom with Morrison Defense Systems. It was about to begin at 30,000 feet, in the first-class cabin she'd worked 15 years to reach. 16 minutes into Flight 447, Dr. Samantha Williams was finally beginning to relax. The Boeing 777 had reached its cruising altitude of 32,000 feet, and the familiar hum of jet engines provided a soothing backdrop as she reviewed her presentation. Slides on her MacBook Pro. The first-class cabin was everything she'd imagined: spacious leather seats that actually reclined, real crystal glasses for the complimentary orange juice, and enough legroom to stretch out comfortably. Sam glanced around the cabin, taking mental notes of her fellow first-class passengers. In seat 1B sat Richard Hartwell, a distinguished man, in his 60s with silver hair and a Rolex that caught the overhead lights. His briefcase bore the logo of Hartwell Industries, and Sam recognized him from Forbes magazine covers. Across the aisle, a woman in designer clothes worked on what appeared to be architectural blueprints. Behind her, 2 men in expensive suits discussed merger negotiations in hushed tones. For the first time in months, Sam allowed herself to feel like she belonged. Her presentation was polished to perfection. Her research was bulletproof, and her innovative approach to military communications would revolutionize how defense contractors thought about secure networks. Morrison Defense Systems would have to say yes. The proposal was simply too good to refuse. She was highlighting a crucial section about encryption protocols when a shadow fell across her laptop screen. Sam looked up to see Jessica Monroe standing in the aisle beside her seat. that same fake smile plastered across her face. But now, something had shifted. The barely concealed disdain from earlier had transformed into open hostility, and Jessica's blue eyes glittered with malicious intent. "Ma'am," Jessica announced loudly, her voice carrying across the entire first-class cabin and ensuring every passenger could hear, "I'm afraid there's been a terrible mistake with your seating assignment." Sam blinked, confused by the sudden interruption. She'd been quietly working, bothering no one, following every instruction the crew had given during their safety demonstration. "I'm sorry, what kind of mistake?" Jessica's smile grew wider, but it never reached her eyes. She held a clipboard against her chest like a shield, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against its surface in a rhythm that suggested barely controlled excitement. "This seat belongs to Mr. Hartwell here," she said, gesturing toward the man in 1B, who looked up from his Wall Street Journal with obvious surprise and discomfort. "He's one of our most valued Platinum Elite members, and there's been a computer error that double-booked his preferred seating area." "But I'm sitting in 2A, Sam replied evenly, her years of corporate training kicking in. "Never let them see you sweat. Never raise your voice. Always have documentation ready." She reached for her purse and pulled out her boarding pass, holding it up so Jessica could see the clear seat assignment. "This is my assigned seat. See? 2A, first class." Jessica barely glanced at the boarding pass, waving it away dismissively, as if Sam were showing her a coupon for a free coffee. "I don't care what that piece of paper says," she snapped, her professional mask finally slipping completely. The transformation was startling from fake sweetness to raw contempt in the span of seconds. "Mr. Hartwell pays over $200,000 a year to fly with Skyline Airlines. He's been a Platinum Elite member for 15 years, and his loyalty to our company means his comfort takes priority." The words hit Sam like a physical blow, but it was Jessica's next comment that truly stunned her. "You probably got this ticket through some diversity program discount anyway," Jessica continued, her voice dripping with assumption and prejudice. "One of those corporate inclusion initiatives where companies buy tickets for their employees to make themselves look good." The silence that followed was deafening. Every passenger in first class had heard the comment, and the discomfort was palpable. Mr. Hartwell looked absolutely mortified, shaking his head and starting to speak, but Jessica quickly cut him off. "Mr. Hartwell, please don't concern yourself with this situation. We'll have it resolved immediately." Sam felt her cheeks burn with humiliation and rage, but her voice remained steady. Years of facing discrimination in Silicon Valley boardrooms had taught her to maintain composure even when her world was crumbling around her. "Ma'am, I paid full price for this ticket. I can show you my credit card statement, my confirmation email, and my Skyline Airlines account profile. I'm a Platinum Elite member myself, with over 100,000 miles flown this year alone." She pulled out her phone and navigated to her Skyline Airlines app, showing Jessica her account status, her purchase history, and the $4,847 charge for this very seat. The evidence was overwhelming and indisputable. But Jessica wasn't interested in evidence. Her jaw was set in determination, and Sam realized with growing horror that this wasn't about seating charts or computer errors. This was about something much darker and more personal. "I said I don't care about your paperwork," Jessica hissed, her voice low enough that passengers in coach couldn't hear, but loud enough to ensure everyone in first class was getting the full show. "Corporate diversity initiatives don't impress me. You people always think you can wave around some documentation and demand special treatment." "You people?" Sam repeated, her voice rising slightly despite her efforts to remain calm. The phrase hung in the air like poison, confirming what she'd suspected from the moment she'd seen the crew's hostile stares at the gate. Around them, the Other first-class passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The woman with the architectural blueprints had stopped working and was staring openly at the confrontation. The two businessmen had paused their merger discussion to watch the drama unfold. Mr. Hartwell looked like he wanted to crawl under his seat, clearly uncomfortable with being used as a pawn in Jessica's discriminatory power play. But no one spoke. No one said a word in Sam's defense. Sam's mind raced as she processed the situation. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a computer glitch. This was deliberate, calculated discrimination, and Jessica was enjoying every moment of it. The flight attendant's body language radiated satisfaction, as if she'd been waiting for exactly this opportunity to put Sam in her place. "I have every right to be in this seat," Sam said firmly, her voice carrying the authority she developed from years of commanding boardrooms full of skeptical executives. "I purchased this ticket legally. I'm a paying customer, and I'm not moving based on your assumptions about how I acquired my seat." Jessica's eyes narrowed dangerously, and Sam could see her calculating her next move. The flight attendant's hand moved to the call button that would summon additional crew members, and Sam's stomach dropped as she realized this confrontation was about to escalate far beyond a simple seating dispute. The battle for Seat 2A was just beginning, and Sam was about to discover just how far some people would go to maintain their prejudices, even at 30,000 feet above the ground. Jessica Monroe's finger hovered over the call button for exactly 3 seconds. 3 seconds that felt like an eternity to Dr. Samantha Williams as she watched the flight attendant's face transform into a mask of vindictive satisfaction. The soft chime echoed through the first-class cabin, a sound that would normally signal a request for extra pillows or another glass of champagne. Today, it was a call to arms. "Captain Hayes to first class," Jessica spoke into her communication device, her voice suddenly professional again for the benefit of anyone listening to crew communications. "We have a passenger situation that requires your immediate attention." Sam's heart hammered against her ribs as she realized the trap she'd walked into. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment confrontation. It was orchestrated, planned, and she was the unwitting target. Around her, the other first-class passengers pretended to return to their newspapers and laptops, but she could feel their eyes stealing glances at her, waiting to see how this drama would unfold. Mr. Richard Hartwell, the distinguished businessman, who'd been unwillingly dragged into this mess, finally found his voice. "Excuse me, miss," he said to Jessica, his tone carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being listened to. "I never requested a different seat. I'm perfectly comfortable in 1B, and this lady appears to have proper documentation for her seat." Jessica's jaw tightened, clearly annoyed that her human shield was refusing to cooperate. "Mr. Hartwell, please don't worry yourself about airline policies. Our crew is trained to handle these situations, and we always prioritize the comfort of our most loyal customers." "But I am comfortable," Hartwell insisted, his voice growing firmer. "And I don't appreciate being used to justify what appears to be." Heavy footsteps echoed from the direction of the cockpit, cutting off Hartwell's objection. Captain Robert Hayes emerged from behind the galley partition like a storm cloud, his imposing 6'2" frame filling the narrow aisle. His silver hair was perfectly combed, his uniform pristine, and his face bore the expression of a man who'd grown comfortable with absolute authority over his domain. At 58, Hayes had been flying commercial aircraft for 31 years, and his military background showed in every precisely measured step. He wore his captain's stripes like armor, and his cold gray eyes swept the first-class cabin with the calculating gaze of someone assessing a battlefield. When those eyes settled on Sam, they narrowed with unmistakable disapproval. "What seems to be the problem here?" Captain Hayes asked, his voice booming with the kind of authority that was designed to end conversations, not start them. But he wasn't asking Sam, he was addressing Jessica, as if Sam were merely a piece of luggage that had been misplaced. "Captain, we have a passenger who's refusing to comply with our seating arrangements," Jessica replied smoothly, her earlier hostility now hidden behind a veneer of professional concern. "She's become increasingly agitated and argumentative when we've tried to resolve the situation diplomatically." Sam's mouth fell open at the blatant lie. "That's absolutely not true," she said, her voice steady but urgent. "I've been sitting quietly in my assigned seat, working on my laptop. I haven't raised my voice or been argumentative. I've simply shown my valid boarding pass and asked to remain in the seat I paid for." Captain Hayes finally looked directly at Sam, and the contempt in his expression was unmistakable. He took in her appearance with obvious skepticism, her professional attire, her laptop, her first-class ticket, as if trying to solve a puzzle that didn't make sense to him. "Ma'am," he said, his tone heavy with condescension, "my crew has informed me that you're refusing to cooperate with our standard boarding procedures. I won't tolerate disruptive passengers on my aircraft, regardless of what ticket you think you have." The phrase, "what ticket you think you have," hit Sam like a slap. She held up her boarding pass, her confirmation email, and her phone showing her Skyline Airlines app with crystal-clear documentation of her purchase. "Sir, this isn't about what I think I have. This is about what I actually paid for seat 2A, first class, purchased 3 weeks ago for $4,847. Captain Hayes barely glanced at the evidence, waving it away with the same dismissiveness Jessica had shown. "Ma'am, I don't have time for this nonsense. My crew has protocols to follow, and when they determine that a seating arrangement needs to be adjusted, passengers are expected to comply immediately." "But there's no legitimate reason for the adjustment," Sam pressed, feeling desperation creep into her voice despite her efforts to stay calm. "I have valid documentation. I'm a Platinum Elite member, and I haven't violated any airline policies. The only explanation I can see for this treatment is, don't you dare." Captain Hayes cut her off, his voice rising to a level that commanded attention throughout the cabin. "Don't you dare try to play that card with me. I've been flying for 3 decades, and I treat every passenger with equal respect and professionalism." The irony of his statement, while he was literally treating her with neither respect nor professionalism, wasn't lost on Sam. But she could see that logic and evidence weren't going to work here. This was about power, control, and something much uglier that neither Hayes nor Jessica were willing to acknowledge openly. From the corner of her eye, Sam noticed head flight attendant Marcus Thompson approaching from the back of the cabin. As a black man in his 40s, Marcus had likely faced his own share of discrimination throughout his career, and Sam felt a spark of hope that finally someone would see the injustice unfolding and speak up for what was right. Marcus stopped beside Captain Hayes, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes revealing an internal struggle. For a moment, his gaze met Sam's, and she saw something that broke her heart: recognition, sympathy, and the painful decision to choose self-preservation over solidarity. "Marcus," Captain Hayes said without looking at him, "please explain to this passenger our standard procedures for resolving seating conflicts." The silence stretched for several seconds as Marcus wrestled with his conscience. Sam watched his internal battle play out across his face, the desire to do what was right, warring with the fear of challenging his superiors and potentially losing his job. In the end, fear won. "Ma'am," Marcus said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper, "airline policy gives the captain and crew discretion over seating arrangements for the safety and comfort of all passengers." The betrayal cut deeper than Jessica's obvious hostility or Captain Hayes' blatant discrimination. This was a man who understood exactly what she was experiencing, and he was choosing to be complicit in it. "Safety and comfort?" Sam repeated, her voice finally rising above the calm, professional tone she'd maintained. What possible safety concern could my presence in Seat 2A create? And whose comfort are we really talking about here? Captain Hayes stepped closer, using his height and position to intimidate her. Ma'am, you have exactly 30 seconds to gather your belongings and move to your new seat assignment in coach, or I will have this aircraft diverted to the nearest airport where you will be removed by federal air marshals. The threat hung in the air like a toxic cloud, and Sam realized with crystal clarity that she was facing a choice that would define not only this flight, but possibly the rest of her career. The 30-second ultimatum ticked away like a time bomb in Dr. Samantha Williams' mind as she stared into Captain Hayes' cold gray eyes. Around her, the first-class cabin had fallen into the kind of uncomfortable silence that accompanies public humiliation. Passengers pretended to read while stealing glances at the unfolding drama, their discomfort palpable but their voices notably absent. Sam's mind raced through her options, each one more devastating than the last. If she refused to move and the plane was diverted, she'd miss her presentation with Morrison Defense Systems. 2 years of work, $50 million in potential contracts, and her shot at becoming the youngest VP in company history would evaporate. But if she complied with this blatant discrimination, she'd be validating every assumption her colleagues had made about her being a diversity hire who didn't belong. In first class. 20 seconds, Captain Hayes announced, checking his watch with theatrical precision. His voice carried the satisfaction of a man who believed he'd cornered his opponent into submission. It was Mr. Richard Hartwell who broke the spell. The distinguished businessman stood up from seat 1B, his face flushed with indignation. Captain, this is absolutely outrageous. This woman has done nothing wrong. She has proper documentation, and I refuse to be used as an excuse for this treatment. Mr. Hartwell, please remain seated, Jessica Monroe snapped, her professional mask slipping again. This doesn't concern you. Like hell it doesn't, Hartwell shot back, his corporate composure cracking. You're using my name to justify discrimination, and I won't stand for it. I'm a platinum member because I choose to be, not because I need to have other passengers thrown out to make room for me. But Captain Hayes wasn't interested in dissent from passengers, no matter how elite their status. Sir, return to your seat immediately, or you'll be joining this lady in coach. The threat was clear, and Hartwell's moral courage wavered in the face of Hayes' authority. After a moment of internal struggle, he slowly sat back down, his face burning with shame at his own capitulation. Sam watched this exchange with a mixture of gratitude and heartbreak. At least someone had tried to speak up, even if they'd ultimately been silenced. But the message was clear. Even the most privileged passengers were powerless against the crew's united front of discrimination. Time's up, Captain Hayes declared. Ma'am, gather your belongings now. Sam's hands trembled as she closed her laptop and began packing her presentation materials. Every movement felt like surrender, every gesture an admission of defeat. Her $4,847 first-class ticket lay crumpled in her hand, expensive paper that had proven worthless against institutional prejudice. This is wrong, she said quietly, but her voice carried across the silent cabin. This is discrimination, and everyone on this plane knows it. Ma'am, that's enough, Marcus Townsend finally spoke up, but his voice lacked conviction. His words were meant to silence her, but his tone betrayed his own discomfort with the situation. As Sam stood and reached for her carry-on bag, something unexpected happened. The woman across the aisle, an elegant brunette in her 60s, who'd been working on architectural blueprints, suddenly spoke up with crystal clarity. This is disgusting, the woman announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. I've been flying for 40 years, and I've never witnessed such blatant discrimination. Young lady, I saw everything, and I'm documenting every detail. Sam's eyes widened as she realized the woman was holding up her phone, recording the entire Interaction. The architectural blueprints now lay forgotten as she focused her iPhone camera on Captain Hayes' face. "Ma'am, please put that device away," Hayes commanded, but his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. "Absolutely not," the woman replied sharply. "My name is Eleanor Patterson. I'm a retired federal judge, and I know discrimination when I see it. This entire crew should be ashamed of themselves." Suddenly, other passengers began stirring. The two businessmen who'd been discussing mergers exchanged meaningful looks and pulled out their phones. A younger passenger in seat 4C, who Sam hadn't noticed before, was already recording on what appeared to be multiple devices. "Y'all just messed with the wrong person," declared a teenage voice from somewhere in the middle of the cabin. Sam looked back to see a young black man, maybe 17 years old, holding his phone high in the air. "This is going straight to TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. Everyone's gonna see how y'all treat people." The energy in the cabin shifted dramatically. What had been uncomfortable silence moments before was now buzzing with indignation and activity. Passengers were pulling out phones, taking pictures, and exchanging contact information. Someone was already typing furiously on a laptop, presumably documenting the incident in real time. "Everyone stop recording immediately," Jessica Monroe demanded shrilly, her carefully constructed professionalism completely abandoned. "This is a violation of airline policy." "Show me where it says that," challenged a voice from Coach. An elderly white woman was making her way up the aisle, moving with the determined gait of someone on a mission. "I've been a civil rights lawyer for 50 years, and I know exactly what's happening here." Sam felt tears of gratitude welling in her eyes as she realized that while the first-class cabin had initially failed her, the broader community of passengers was rallying to her defense. These weren't people who knew her or had anything to gain from speaking up. They were simply decent human beings who recognized injustice when they saw it. "Ma'am, you need to move to your new seat immediately," Captain Hayes said, but his voice now carried a note of uncertainty. The power dynamic had shifted, and he was no longer the undisputed authority in the situation. Sam squared her shoulders and began the longest walk of her professional life. Each step down the aisle toward Coach felt like a public humiliation. But it was also something else, a galvanizing moment that was turning random passengers into witnesses, advocates, and allies. As she passed row after row of seats, more phones came out. Passengers offered her words of encouragement, business cards, and promises to serve as witnesses. A flight attendant from Coach, an older Latina woman, whose name tag read Maria, met her halfway down the aisle with tears in her eyes. "Mia, I'm so sorry," Maria whispered, guiding Sam toward an empty middle seat in row 34. "This is not who we are. This is not what our airline stands for." Sam nodded gratefully, recognizing an ally in an unexpected place. As she squeezed between a crying baby and a man who smelled strongly of garlic, she pulled out her phone and began documenting everything: her boarding pass, her seat assignment, her credit card statement, and most importantly, her own account of what had just transpired. The humiliation was complete, but so was her documentation. If Captain Hayes and his crew thought they could quietly sweep this incident under the rug, they were about to learn a very expensive lesson about the power of truth in the digital age. From her cramped middle seat in the back of the plane, Dr. Samantha Williams began composing the message that would change everything. The moment Flight 447's wheels touched the runway at LaGuardia Airport with a gentle bump, Dr. Samantha Williams' phone erupted like a digital volcano. Notifications flooded her screen so rapidly that the device actually lagged, struggling to keep up with the avalanche of messages, alerts, and calls. What she didn't know was that 30,000 feet below, while she'd been enduring 3 hours of humiliation in seat 34B, her story had begun spreading across the internet at the speed of light. It started with a text message Sam had sent to her younger brother Marcus during the flight, using the plane's Wi-Fi to document the incident in real time. Marcus Williams, a 28-year-old social media manager for an Oakland-based nonprofit, had read his sister's message while sitting in his downtown office and felt his blood pressure spike to dangerous levels. "They did WAT to my sister?" he'd muttered to his coworker, showing her the screenshots Sam had sent. Within minutes, Marcus had crafted a Twitter thread that would become legendary in civil rights social media history. Thread, "My sister doctor." Samantha Williams, MIT graduate and tech VP, was just kicked out of first class on at Skyline Air Flight 447, despite having paid full price, $4,847, for her seat. Why? Because the crew assumed she got a diversity discount. This is 2024. This is America. 147th. Marcus's thread included every piece of documentation Sam had sent him. Photos of her boarding pass, screenshots of her credit card statement, her Skyline Airlines elite status, and most damaging of all, a short video she'd managed to record of Captain Hayes threatening her with federal air marshals. But Marcus wasn't the only one spreading the story. 17-year-old Jaden Thompson, the high school student who'd recorded parts of the confrontation from his seat in 12C, had uploaded a TikTok video with the caption, "When keeping it racist goes wrong, hashtag Skyline shame hashtag first class, while black hashtag discrimination." His video, shot with the steady hands of a Generation Z digital native, captured Jessica Monroe's contemptuous expression and Captain Hayes' authoritarian tone with devastating clarity. The video had gained 50,000 views in the first hour. By the time the plane landed, it was approaching 2.3 million. Retired federal judge Eleanor Patterson had taken a different approach. She'd used her extensive network of legal contacts to share Sam's story through professional channels, sending detailed emails to civil rights organizations, bar associations, and legal journalists. Her message was clinical, precise, and utterly damning. Witness textbook discrimination on commercial flight, multiple violations of federal civil rights laws, crew engaged in coordinated harassment of paying passenger based solely on race. Full documentation available. The elderly civil rights lawyer, who'd introduced herself as Dr. Ruth Morrison, no relation to Morrison Defense Systems, though the irony wasn't lost on anyone, had live tweeted the entire incident with the kind of legal analysis that made law. Professors across the country stop what they were doing and pay attention. As Sam finally powered on her phone and connected to the airport's Wi-Fi, the full scope of what was happening began to unfold. Her phone buzzed continuously with notifications. "Your brother's Twitter thread has been retweeted 45,000 times. You have 847 new followers on LinkedIn. Your story is trending on Reddit r public freakout. CNN breaking news alert mentions your incident." But it was the call from her CEO, David Chun, that truly drove home the magnitude of what was happening. "Sam, where the hell are you?" David's voice crackled through her phone as she navigated the crowded terminal. "Your story is everywhere. Fox News, MSNBC, CBS, ABC, everyone's calling asking for comments. Our stock price jumped 3% because people are praising how we support our employees. Get to that Morrison presentation and close this deal. But know that you've got the entire company behind you." The Morrison presentation. In all the chaos, Sam had almost forgotten why she was in New York in the first place. She glanced at her watch. 11:47 a.m. Her presentation was at 2 p.m., which gave her just enough time to get to Manhattan, find a quiet space to compose herself, and prepare for the most important meeting of her career. But first, she needed to understand what was happening online. Sam found a quiet corner near her baggage claim and began scrolling through the digital storm her story had created. The hashtag Skyline Shame was trending nationally. competing with political news and celebrity gossip for the top spot on Twitter. The responses ranged from outraged support to detailed legal analysis to corporate executives sharing their own stories of discrimination. Tech billionaire Elon Musk had retweeted Marcus's thread with the comment, "Absolutely unacceptable. This is exactly why we need to disrupt traditional industries." Oprah Winfrey's verified account has shared Jaden's TikTok, "Still fighting the same battles in 2024. Dr. Williams deserves better. We all deserve better." The NAACP had issued an official statement calling for a federal investigation. The Department of Transportation had announced they were reviewing the incident. 3 different law firms had reached out offering pro bono representation. But perhaps most importantly, Sam noticed that Skyline Airlines' official social media accounts had gone completely silent. No responses, no damage control, no corporate speak. Just radio silence as the storm grew stronger by the hour. Her phone rang again. This time, it was a number she didn't recognize, with a 404 area code Atlanta, where Skyline Airlines was headquartered. "Dr. Williams? This is Margaret Chun, CEO of Skyline Airlines. I know you're probably the last person who wants to hear from anyone associated with our company right now, but I need you to know that we're taking immediate action. That crew will be off our planes by the end of today, and I'd like to personally apologize and discuss how we can make this right." Sam was so shocked that she almost dropped her phone. In her 15 years of corporate experience, she'd never heard a CEO personally call to apologize for anything, let alone within hours of an incident. "Ms. Chun," Sam replied carefully, "I appreciate the call, but I'm not sure what you can do to make this right. The damage is done, and frankly, your crew's behavior suggests this isn't an isolated incident." "You're absolutely correct," Margaret replied, her voice heavy with what sounded like genuine remorse. "We're discovering this crew had multiple prior complaints that were never properly addressed. Dr. Williams, I've been CEO for 8 years, and this is the most ashamed I've ever been of my company. We failed you completely, and we're going to do whatever it takes to ensure this never happens again." As Sam processed this unprecedented conversation, her phone buzzed with a new notification. Jaden's TikTok video had just surpassed 5 million views, and hashtag Skyline Shame was now trending in 12 countries. The digital wildfire was spreading faster than anyone could have imagined, and there was no way to put it out. The only question now was how much of Skyline Airlines would be left standing when the flames finally died down. At 2:17 a.m. Eastern Time, Margaret Chun stood in the Crisis Management War Room on the 47th floor of Skyline Airlines Atlanta headquarters, staring at a wall of monitors displaying the digital apocalypse consuming her company. Each screen told a piece of the devastating story: stock prices in freefall, social media sentiment analysis showing 94% negative, and cable news gyrants that made her stomach churn. "CEO refuses to comment on racist incident" scrolled across. CNN, Skyline stock plummets as discrimination video goes viral, blazed on CNBC. Is this the end of Skyline Airlines? QUESTIONED Fox Business. Margaret had been CEO of Skyline Airlines for 8 years, transforming it from a regional carrier into one of America's most respected airlines. She'd survived fuel crises, natural disasters, and even a pandemic that grounded most of the aviation industry, but nothing had prepared her for this. The numbers were catastrophic. In less than 12 hours, hashtag Skyline Shame had generated over 2.8 million posts across social media platforms. The airline's customer service lines were jammed with callers demanding refunds. Their corporate partners were quietly distancing themselves. Most damaging of all, their stock price had dropped 23% in after-hours trading, wiping out nearly $800 million in company value. "Talk to me, Janet," Margaret said to Janet Rodriguez, her chief legal officer, who was hunched over a laptop with her team of attorneys. How bad is this legally? Janet looked up with the expression of someone delivering a terminal diagnosis. Margaret, this isn't just bad, it's a legal nightmare. We're looking at potential violations of the Civil Rights Act, the Air Carrier Access Act, and about 6 different state anti-discrimination laws. Dr. Williams has documentation for everything. Multiple witnesses recorded the incident, and we have crew members on record making explicitly discriminatory statements. But surely there's some company policy that's just it, Janet interrupted, pulling up files on her tablet. There's no policy that supports what that crew did. None. In fact, our official company policies explicitly prohibit exactly this type of behavior, which means either they went completely rogue or ... double quotes. She paused, her face grave. Or what? Or this kind of behavior has been happening regularly, and we've been turning a blind eye to it. Margaret's blood ran cold. Get me everything on that crew. Every complaint, every incident report, every performance review. I want to know how the hell we got here. What they found over the next 4 hours was even worse than Margaret had feared. The investigation, led by Chief Human Resources Officer David Park and the legal team, uncovered a pattern of discrimination so extensive and well documented that Margaret wondered how it had been hidden for so long. Captain Robert Hayes had 7 formal complaints filed against him over the past 5 years. 7. A passenger in 2019 had accused him of making racially charged comments about Middle Eastern travelers. In 2021, a family had complained that Hayes had subjected their elderly grandmother, who wore a hijab, to unnecessary additional security screening. Last year, a black businessman had reported that Hayes had questioned the authenticity of his first-class upgrade certificate. Each complaint had been investigated by Regional Manager Thomas Phillips, Hayes' direct supervisor. In every case, Phillips had concluded that the complaints were unsubstantiated or resulted from misunderstandings. Hayes had received nothing more than verbal counseling and diversity awareness training that he apparently ignored. Jessica Monroe's record was equally damning. 5 separate complaints about discriminatory behavior, including one from a Native American passenger who'd been told she probably didn't understand airline policies. Another from a young black mother who'd been repeatedly questioned about whether she could afford to fly first class while traveling with her infant, Marcus. Thompson's file revealed a different kind of problem. While he'd never been directly accused of discrimination, his performance reviews consistently noted his reluctance to intervene in passenger disputes and his tendency to defer to senior crew members even in questionable situations. This is systematic institutional failure, David Park reported to Margaret during the 6 a.m. crisis meeting. These complaints weren't just ignored, they were actively buried. Phillips has been covering for Hayes for years, and apparently, other regional managers have been doing the same thing with problem crews across our network. Margaret's phone rang. The caller ID showed Warren McNeil, the chairman of Skyline's board of directors. Margaret, I'm watching CNN in my hotel room in Singapore. Warren's voice crackled through the speakerphone. Please tell me you have a plan to fix this catastrophe. Warren, it's worse than we thought. We're not dealing with one rogue crew. We're dealing with a systemic problem that's been ignored by middle management for years. The silence on the other end of the line lasted several seconds. Warren McNeil was 71 years old, a former Secretary of Transportation who'd helped build Skyline into the airline it was today. His voice, when he finally spoke, was barely controlled fury. How many other Dr. Williamses are out there, Margaret? How many passengers have we mistreated and humiliated? How many discrimination lawsuits are waiting to be filed now that people know they can speak up? It was a question that kept Margaret awake for the remainder of the night. Her team had already identified 12 other incidents from the past year alone that showed similar patterns of discriminatory behavior. 12 documented cases, which meant there were probably dozens more that had gone unreported. The social media monitoring team delivered hourly updates that showed the story's reach expanding globally. Hashtag Skyline Shame was trending in 23 countries. Now, international news outlets were picking up the story. Aviation industry analysts were predicting a fundamental shift in how airlines would handle discrimination complaints. At 7:30 a.m., Margaret's chief communications officer, Sarah Kim, burst into the war room with her laptop. "Margaret, you need to see this. Dr. Williams just closed her Morrison Defense Systems deal. A $50 million contract." The CEO of Morrison posted about it on LinkedIn, specifically mentioning how impressed they were with her professionalism despite the unconscionable treatment she received from Skyline Airlines this morning. Margaret stared at the LinkedIn post, which had already received thousands of comments and shares. Dr. Samantha Williams hadn't just survived Skyline's discrimination, she'd triumphed despite it. The contrast between her grace under pressure and her company's institutional failures couldn't have been starker. "That's it," Margaret declared, standing up and addressing the entire crisis team. "We're not doing damage control anymore. We're doing the right thing, regardless of what it costs us. I want termination letters prepared for Hayes, Monroe, Thompson, and Phillips. I want a complete review of every discrimination complaint filed against our company in the past 10 years. And I want a press conference scheduled for noon today where I personally apologize to Dr. Williams and announce the most comprehensive anti-discrimination program in aviation history." "Margaret," Janet warned, "if you fire the entire crew and admit institutional failures, we're opening ourselves up to massive legal liability." Margaret looked around the room at her team, good people who'd worked tirelessly to build Skyline into a respected airline, now faced with the reality that their company had been systematically failing its customers. "Then so be it," she said firmly. "We failed Dr. Williams, and we've probably failed hundreds of other passengers. It's time we faced the consequences and earned back the right to call ourselves a respectable airline." The investigation was complete. Now came the reckoning that would either save Skyline Airlines or destroy it completely. At exactly 11:47 a.m. Eastern Time, precisely 16 minutes after Dr. Samantha Williams had been forced from Seat 2, the previous day Captain Robert Hayes was sitting in his suburban Atlanta kitchen, scrolling through his phone in disbelief. Man who had wielded absolute authority over Flight 447 just hours earlier now felt his world crumbling with each refresh of his Twitter feed. The call came while he was trying to make sense of a particularly savage meme that featured his face, superimposed over a historical photo with the caption, "Same energy, different century." His phone buzzed with Skyline Airlines' HR department number, and Hayes answered with the confidence of a man who'd survived 3 decades in commercial aviation. "Captain Hayes, this is Director Patricia Walsh from Human Resources," came the professional but terse voice. "I'm calling to inform you that your employment with Skyline Airlines is terminated immediately, effective as of this call." The words hit Hayes like turbulence at 40,000 feet. "Terminated? On what grounds?" "I followed company protocol exactly. Captain, you violated multiple federal civil rights laws, engaged in discriminatory harassment of a paying passenger, and brought unprecedented negative publicity to our airline," Patricia continued, reading from what was clearly a prepared script. "Your final paycheck and COBRA information will be mailed within 72 hours. Please return your uniform items, company identification, and pilot credentials to Atlanta headquarters by end of business today." The line went dead. Hayes stared at his phone in stunned silence, the reality of his situation finally sinking in. 31 years of flying, thousands of safe flights, A spotless safety record, all destroyed in 16 minutes of what he still believed was justified crew authority. His wife, Karen, looked up from her laptop where she'd been reading increasingly horrific news coverage about her husband. "Robert," she said quietly, "our daughter just called. Her friends at college have seen the videos. She's ashamed to be your daughter right now." 200 miles away in Birmingham, Alabama, Jessica Monroe was having a very different experience with her termination call. Unlike Hayes, she had seen it coming from the moment her phone had exploded with notifications overnight. Friends, family members, and former coworkers had been sending her links to the viral content featuring her face in her most discriminatory moments. When HR Director Patricia Walsh delivered the same termination script, Jessica's response was pure defiance. "You can fire me, but I'm not apologizing for doing my job," Jessica snapped into the phone. That woman didn't belong in first class, and everyone knows it. She probably got that ticket through some corporate diversity program, and I wasn't. "About to, Ms. Monroe," Patricia interrupted firmly. "I'm going to stop you right there. Anything else you say could be used against both you and the company in the inevitable lawsuits. Your employment is terminated. Your final paycheck will reflect 2 weeks of severance pay, which is more generous than your conduct deserves." After hanging up, Jessica immediately called her brother, a lawyer in Mobile. "Danny, they fired me for doing my job. I need you to sue them for wrongful termination." Danny Monroe had already seen the videos. "Jess, I love you, but you're radioactive right now. No lawyer in Alabama is going to touch this case. You discriminated against a paying customer on camera, and it's gone viral. My advice? Disappear from social media and pray this blows over." But it was Jessica's social media presence that sealed her fate completely. Instead of following her brother's advice, she posted a defiant Facebook message that afternoon. "Fired for doing my job and maintaining standards on my airplane. Some people need to learn their place, and I don't apologize for saying it. Hashtag truth hurts. Hashtag standards." The post was screenshot and shared thousands of times within minutes, ensuring that Jessica Monroe would become the permanent face of airline discrimination for years to come. In Queens, New York, Marcus Thompson received his termination call while sitting in his one-bedroom apartment, staring at his reflection in the black television screen. Unlike his former colleagues, Marcus felt nothing but shame as Patricia Walsh delivered his termination notice. "I understand," he said quietly. "I failed Dr. Williams, I failed my community, and I failed myself. The termination is justified." But Marcus's response to his firing would prove to be radically different from his former colleagues. Within hours of receiving the call, he had composed a video message that would become one of the most powerful apology videos in social media history. Sitting in his modest living room, wearing a simple white t-shirt instead of his flight attendant uniform, Marcus looked directly into his phone camera with tears streaming down his face. "My name is Marcus Thompson. Yesterday, I was the head flight attendant on Flight 447, and I watched my crew discriminate against Dr. Samantha Williams. I didn't participate in the harassment, but I didn't stop it either. I chose my job security over doing what was right, and that makes me complicit in racism." He paused, wiping his eyes before continuing. "I grew up in Detroit, the son of parents who lived through segregation. My father rode in the back of buses and drank from colored water fountains so that I could have opportunities he never had. Yesterday, when I had the chance to stand up for what he taught me was right, I failed. Dr. Williams deserved better from me. My community deserved better from me. I deserved better from myself." The video, posted to Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, simultaneously, went viral within hours. Comments poured in from viewers who were moved by his genuine remorse and accountability. Many noted the stark contrast between Marcus's response and the defiance shown by Hayes and Monroe. Meanwhile, Regional Manager Thomas Phillips was terminated during a conference call with 3 HR representatives and the company's legal counsel. His firing came with additional consequences, an announcement that Skyline would be conducting a comprehensive review of every discrimination complaint he had dismissed over the past decade. Mr. Phillips, Patricia Walsh concluded, your systematic failure to address discriminatory behavior has exposed this company to massive legal liability. We'll be cooperating fully with federal investigators who will be reviewing every case you handled. By 6 p.m. Eastern Time, the terminations were complete. An entire flight crew and their supervisor 5 careers destroyed in a matter of hours. But the speed of the firings sent a clear message that resonated across social media. Discriminate at your own risk, because the consequences would be swift and severe. At Skyline headquarters, CEO Margaret Chun reviewed the termination reports with her legal team. The 16-minute incident that had started everything was now being measured in the 16 hours it had taken to completely reshape her airline's approach to discrimination. Are we legally protected? She asked Janet Rodriguez, her chief legal officer. We're as protected as we can be, Janet replied. But Margaret, Hayes is already talking to lawyers about wrongful termination. He truly believes he did nothing wrong, Margaret nodded grimly. The reckoning was complete, but the legal battles were just beginning. The question now was whether Skyline Airlines could survive the aftermath of doing the right thing, or whether their moral courage would destroy the company she'd spent 8 years building. The 16-minute reckoning was over, but its consequences would echo for years to come. 6 months later, Dr. Samantha Williams stood at the podium of the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis, Tennessee, addressing an audience of 2,000 people gathered for the annual Voices of Change Symposium. The same Navy blazer that had served as her armor on Flight 447 now felt like a badge of honor as she looked out at a sea of faceless activists, corporate leaders, students, and ordinary citizens who had been inspired by her story. When I boarded Flight 447 on that Tuesday morning in February, Sam began, her voice steady and clear, I thought the hardest part of my day would be convincing Morrison Defense Systems to trust a 32-year-old black woman with their $50 million contract. I had no idea that my greatest battle would happen at 30,000 feet, in a first-class cabin I'd worked 15 years to afford. The audience was silent, hanging on every word. Behind Sam, a massive screen displayed the now famous photo of her boarding pass seat 2A, first class. It had become a symbol of dignity in the face of discrimination. Her transformation over the past 6 months had been remarkable. What could have destroyed her career had instead elevated her to national prominence. The Morrison Defense Systems contract she'd closed that day, despite arriving shaken and humiliated from her flight experience, had made her the youngest vice president in Techno Global Industries history. But that was just the beginning. They $2.3 million settlement from Skyline Airlines had allowed Sam to start her own consulting firm, Williams Equity Solutions, which specialized in helping corporations develop authentic diversity and inclusion programs. Her client list read like a Fortune 500 directory: Apple, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, and ironically, 3 major airlines including Skyline itself. The beautiful thing about injustice, Sam continued, clicking to her next slide, is that it reveals who we really are, both individually and as a society. Some people, when faced with discrimination, become bitter. Others become better. I chose to become both better at what I do and a little bit bitter about why change takes so long. The audience laughed, appreciating her honesty and humor. Behind the scenes, the ripple effects of Flight 447 continued to expand. Skyline Airlines had not only survived the crisis, but had emerged as an industry leader in civil rights. CEO Margaret Chun's decision to fire the discriminatory crew and admit institutional failures had initially cost the company nearly $1 billion in stock value and triggered dozens of lawsuits from passengers who had experienced similar treatment over the years. But Margaret's comprehensive response mandatory bias training for all 47,000 employees, body cameras for flight attendants, an independent review board for discrimination complaints, and the hiring of Sam's firm to overhaul their policies had ultimately saved the airline. Customer satisfaction scores had reached all-time highs, and Skyline's stock price had not only recovered, but exceeded pre-incident levels. The most dramatic transformation belonged to Marcus Thompson, the former head flight attendant, whose viral apology video had been viewed over 15 million times. After losing his job, Marcus had channeled his shame into purpose, founding a non-profit organization called Bystander No More that trained service industry workers to recognize and interrupt discrimination. His organization had already trained over 10,000 hospitality workers across 12 states, and his TED Talk, The Moral Courage to Interrupt Injustice, had been viewed 8.2 million times. Marcus had become one of the most sought-after speakers on the topic of allyship and moral courage in the workplace. "I failed Dr. Williams in that moment," Marcus often told his audiences. "But I learned that failure isn't final unless you refuse to grow from it. Now I spend every day trying to ensure that other people don't make the same cowardly choice I made." The contrast with his former colleagues was stark. Captain Robert Hayes had never found another flying job, despite filing multiple wrongful termination lawsuits that were quickly dismissed by judges who had seen the viral videos of his behavior. He had spent the past 6 months giving interviews to increasingly fringe media outlets, insisting he had been the victim of cancel culture and reverse racism. Jessica Monroe's fate was even more severe. Her defiant Facebook post after being fired had ensured her permanent unemployability in the service industry. She had moved back in with her parents in rural Alabama and was facing personal bankruptcy from the legal fees associated with the discrimination lawsuits filed against her. As Sam reached the climax of her Memphis speech, she shared the most surprising development of all, her collaboration with Skyline Airlines. 6 months ago, if someone had told me I'd be working with the airline that discriminated against me, I would have laughed them out of the room, Sam said. But real change requires former enemies to become allies. Skyline Airlines didn't just apologize, they transformed. They didn't just fire the discriminatory crew, they rebuilt their entire culture. She clicked to a slide showing Skyline's new diversity statistics. 40% increase in minority pilots, 60% increase in diverse crew members, and a 95% customer satisfaction rating for handling discrimination complaints. That's what accountability looks like, Sam declared. Not just consequences for bad actors, but commitment to systemic change. The audience erupted in applause as Sam revealed her final slide, a photo of herself boarding a Skyline Airlines flight the previous week, sitting in first class, seat 1A, being served by a diverse crew who treated every passenger with dignity and respect. After her speech, Sam was approached by Dr. Patricia Morrison, the civil rights lawyer who had live tweeted the original incident. "Samantha, you've turned a moment of injustice into a movement for change. Your mother would be so proud." Sam's eyes welled with tears as she thought about Rosa Williams, the woman who had worked 3 jobs to put her daughter through MIT. "She always told me that our struggles have purpose if they make the path easier for those who come after us." That evening, as Sam flew home to San Francisco in first class, naturally she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The 16 minutes of humiliation on Flight 447 had led to 6 months of transformation, not just for her, but for an entire industry. Her phone buzzed with a text from her brother Marcus. Saw your Memphis speech online. Mom's watching from heaven, and she's smiling. Sam smiled too, looking out the airplane window at the lights of America stretching. Below, somewhere down there, a young person was working toward their dreams, facing obstacles that seemed insurmountable. Her story had become proof that dignity, perseverance, and moral courage could triumph over prejudice and hatred. The phoenix had risen from the ashes of discrimination, and she was soaring higher than ever before. Sometimes the worst moments create the best outcomes. Sometimes getting knocked down is just the first step to changing the world. And sometimes 16 minutes of injustice can spark a lifetime of justice for countless others. Dr. Samantha Williams had learned to fly long before she ever boarded an airplane. Now she was teaching others to soar.